The preparations at Corpus Christi for an advance progressed as rapidly, in the absence of some 20 or more lieutenants, as if we had been there. The principal business consisted in securing mules and getting them broken to harness. The process was slow but amusing. The animals sold to the government were all young and unbroken, even to the saddle, and were quite as wild as the wild horses of the prairie. Usually a number would be brought in by a company of Mexicans, partners in the delivery. The mules were first driven into a stockade, called a corral, enclosing an acre or more of ground. The Mexicans, who were all experienced in throwing the lasso, would go into the corral on horseback, with their lassos attached to the pommels of their saddles. Soldiers detailed as teamsters and blacksmiths would also enter the corral, the former with ropes to serve as halters, the latter with branding irons and a fire to keep the irons heated. A lasso was then thrown over the neck of a mule, when he would immediately go to the length of his tether, first one end, then the other in the air. While he was thus plunging and gyrating, another lasso would be thrown by another Mexican, catching the animal by a forefoot. This would bring the mule to the ground, when he was seized and held by the teamsters, while the blacksmith put upon him, with hot irons, the initials U.S. ropes were then put about the neck, with a slip noose which would tighten around the throat if pulled. With a man on each side holding these ropes, the mule was released from his other bindings and allowed to rise. With more or less difficulty, he would be conducted to a picket rope outside and fastened there. The delivery of that mule was then complete. This process was gone through, with every mule and wild horse with the army of occupation. You are listening this book at VolantLife Radio. The method of breaking them was less cruel and much more amusing. It is a well-known fact that where domestic animals are used for specific purposes from generation to generation, the descendants are easily, as a rule, subdued to the same uses. At that time in northern Mexico, the mule, or his ancestors, the horse and the ass, was seldom used except for the saddle or pack. At all events, the Corpus Christi mule resisted the new use to which he was being put. The treatment he was subjected to in order to overcome his prejudices was summary and effective. The soldiers were principally foreigners who had enlisted in our large cities, and with the exception of a chance drayman among them, it is not probable that any of the men who reported themselves as competent teamsters had ever driven a mule team in their lives, or indeed that many had had any previous experience in driving any animal whatever to harness. Numbers together can accomplish what twice their number, acting individually, could not perform. 5 mules were allotted to each wagon. A teamster would select at the picket rope 5 animals of nearly the same color and general appearance for his team. With a full corps of assistants, other teamsters, he would then proceed to get his mules together. In twos, the men would approach each animal selected, avoiding as far as possible its heels. 2 ropes would be put about the neck of each animal, with a slip noose, so that he could be choked if too unruly. They were then led out, harnessed by force, and hitched to the wagon in the position they had to keep ever after. 2 men remained on either side of the leader, with the lassos about its neck, and 1 man retained the same restraining influence over each of the others. All being ready, the hold would be slackened and the team started. The first motion was generally 5 mules in the air at one time, backs bowed, hind feet extended to the rear. After repeating this movement a few times, the leaders would start to run. This would bring the breeching tight against the mules at the wheels, which these last seemed to regard as a most unwarrantable attempt at coercion, and would resist by taking a seat, sometimes going so far as to lie down. In time, all were broken in to do their duty submissively, if not cheerfully, but there never was a time during the war when it was safe to let a Mexican mule get entirely loose. The drivers were all teamsters by the time they got through. I recollect one case of a mule that had worked in a team under the saddle, not only for some time at Corpus Christi, where he was broken, but all the way to the point opposite Matamoros, then to Camargo, where he got loose from his fastenings during the night. He did not run away at first, but stayed in the neighborhood for a day or two, coming up sometimes to the feed trough even, but on the approach of the teamster, he always got out of the way. At last, growing tired of the constant effort to catch him, he disappeared altogether. Nothing short of a Mexican with his lasso could have caught him. Regulations would not have warranted the expenditure of $1 in hiring a man with a lasso to catch that mule, but they did allow the expenditure of the mule on a certificate that he had run away, without any fault of the quartermaster on whose returns he was born, and also the purchase of another to take his place. I am a competent witness, for I was regimental quartermaster at the time. You are listening this book at VolantLife Radio. While at Corpus Christi, all the officers who had a fancy for riding kept horses. The animals cost but little in the first instance, and when picketed, they would get their living without any cost. I had 3 not long before the army moved, but a sad accident bereft me of them all at one time. A colored boy who gave them all the attention they got, besides looking after my tent, and that of a classmate and fellow lieutenant, and cooking for us, all for about $8 per month, was riding one to water and leading the other 2. The led horses pulled him from his seat, and all 3 ran away. They never were heard of afterwards. Shortly after that, someone told Captain Bliss, General Taylor's adjutant general, of my misfortune. Yes, I heard Grant lost $5 or $6 worth of horses the other day. He replied. That was a slander. They were broken to the saddle when I got them, and cost nearly $20. I never suspected the colored boy of malicious intent in letting them get away, because, if they had not escaped, he could have had one of them to ride on the long march then in prospect.